Right, so we're going to have a quick look at multiplying directed number. We'll look at a couple of ways of remembering it. I think the thing with directed number is students often get confused with the different operations and how it works differently. So I've covered addition and subtraction in a different video. In this video, we're going to look at just multiplying, okay? So the key is recognizing the difference and being fluent in both, okay? Lots of students, they get confused amongst them and they end up getting the majority of directed number questions wrong because they're trying to use the same rule for multiplication as they do for addition and subtraction when it doesn't always quite work out the same. Right then, so one way of remembering or thinking about directed number when we're multiplying, if you can remember this rule, it will save you a lot of time, but again, students can make the mistake of confusing this with addition and subtraction. So let's first of all, instead of writing positive number every time, I'm going to write this. So this is going to be positive number. And instead of a negative, I'll do a negative in brackets. Okay, so if you can remember the following, it will save you lots of time. If you ever have a positive number and you multiply that by a positive number, that should be fairly straightforward. That's when you first learned your times tables. You're going to end up with just a positive answer. Okay, when you multiply a positive number by a negative number, the answer is always going to end up being negative. Okay, and also because this is commutative, we can write this the other way around. Okay, so if we have a negative number times by a positive number, the answer is also always going to be negative. And then lastly, the final combination is if you have a negative number and you multiply that by a negative number, that will give you a positive number. Okay, so if you can remember these 4 facts, it will save you a lot of time. You could even narrow this down and say, well, if, for instance, in these two, if they're both positive or both negative, your answer will always be positive. So if both numbers are positive or both are negative, the answer will always be positive. Okay, and then you can remember, well, if one of them isn't positive, then your answer is going to be negative. Right then. Before I move on to an example and talk about another way of doing this, I'm going to just run through something else with this that's important to remember. Okay, so now this deals with 2 numbers. Now let's imagine we have 3 numbers. So I'm going to have a negative number times by a positive number times by a negative number. Okay, so we've got to think, how is this going to end up? Now remember, multiplication is commutative, so it doesn't matter which one of these is positive or negative. So let's do a negative times a positive number. Well, we know that's going to give us a negative number from this. And then we're timesing this still by a negative. So our final answer will be a positive number. Okay, let's just look at this slightly differently. So we've got a negative number times a positive number times a negative number. If we did these 2 first, we do a positive times a negative, that gives us a negative, and we still got to times it by this negative, and we know 2 of the same polarity, 2 of the same either positive or negative will always give positive. So this way as well, we also get positive. Okay, so this, knowing this can help us when we have more than one number multiplied together. Right then, a second way of thinking about this requires us to know the following fact. Okay, whenever you multiply by -1, okay, you change the sign. Okay, so whenever you multiply anything by -1, you always change the sign. Okay, it also requires you to know that you can always write a number. Let's take a random negative number, -5,452. That can always be written as -1 times 5,452. Okay, you can always split this out. These two are exactly identical. Okay, they mean the same thing. Okay, so that could be useful before we do our working out, to kind of get rid of all our negative ones, do our multiplication, and then worry about whether it's positive or negative in the end. I'll show you what I mean by this in this example. Okay, so let's have a multiplication, and we're going to use this splitting up of one of the numbers to help us out. We're going to have, let me do an example, we're going to do 300 and let's do 97 multiplied by -91. Okay, now you could, if you've memorized these facts, you can see that if we work out whatever 397 is times by 91, the answer has to be negative because one of the numbers is negative, so it's just like this one. One of the numbers is negative, so the second number here is negative. First number is positive, so the answer must be negative. Okay, I'm going to write this slightly differently just to help us deal with the negative numbers. If we have, we can always rewrite this like so. So all I've done is use this rule. When I split this up to -1 times that, I've used that here to split up our 91. Now all we need to do is worry about our positive numbers. We'll times them together, and then we get that answer. We'll just times by -1, which means we're going to change the sign. So let's do that quickly. I'm going to use Napier's. So you've got 397, 91. Draw my box. Draw my diagonals. Okay, so we've got 7 times 9 is 63. 1 times 7 is 7. 9 times 9 is 81. 9 times 1 is 9. 3 times 9 is 27. 3 times 1 is 3. Now we add up our diagonals. So here we just have 7. Here we have 3 add 0 add 9. That's 12. So I'm going to write my 2 and carry 1 over. Then we have 1 add 6 is 7. Add 3 is 10. Add 1 is 11. Okay, now we have 8 add 7 add 1, so that is 8 add 8, that's 16. So I'm going to put my 6 here, carry the 1, 1 add 2 is 3. Okay, so we know that this here comes to 36,127. Okay, that's not our final answer, remember, because we have to do this number multiplied by -1. Okay, so that means our answer for this first question has to be... Okay, so why would we do this? So the reason I do this is by separating out that -1. Okay, it's just another step to remind us that we're doing multiplication and we're not doing addition. Okay, as I said, people sometimes trip up with adding and subtracting and multiplication and division. It's not necessarily better. Okay, this is quite a concept, taking this -1 out. If you can memorize this and you're confident with it, there's nothing wrong with just doing these remembering these facts up here. As I said, you can think of it as 2 facts to remember. When they're the same, you get positive. When they're different, you get negative. That could save you a lot of time. But if you're not consistently getting them right, then maybe it's worth considering, what if I take out a factor of -1? This will still work if both numbers are negative. Let's just imagine that instead of it being a positive number times a negative number, we've got a negative number times a negative number. Now we could rewrite this as -1 times 397 times 91 times -1. Okay, so that means when we times by -1 once, we get a negative. We'd then have to times by -1 again, and we'd get a positive. Okay, so you can do it by factorising that numbers out. It's important to realise that whatever number you're getting is just going to be the two numbers times together. It's just deciding whether it's positive or negative where the problems crop up.